Since 1983, FAME has helped business and education work for Maine. Contact the authority, the Finance Authority of Maine.
Welcome. This is our Afterthoughts segment where we keep our guests around from our original broadcast program for a little extra discussion that we show only on the web. With us today we have Kit St. John, Executive Director of the Maine Center for Economic Policy, Peter DelGreco, Vice President of Operations for Maine Co, D'arcy Main-Boyington, Director of Economic Development for the City of Brewer, and Peter Gore, Vice President of Governmental Affairs for the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for sticking around. I told you those first couple segments fly by real fast, so we did definitely want to have you stick around to talk about some more of the issues and some other ones as well. And I know one everyone's dying to get into is the one we were just talking about. This is an election year. You've heard about that, right? We got governors running for election, or this is being aired before the primary. But the same issues will be, I think, in the primary and also in the general election. My question to you, this panel of experts, is what are going to be the key business and economic issues? I'm not worried about social issues, the business and economic issues that these gubernatorial candidates are going to have to deal with in the fall. What's the thing that's going to make the difference for voters?
I actually think that what's on voters' minds is jobs, jobs, jobs. And I think there will be an interesting discussion about how gubernatorial candidates discuss the role of state government in assuring or creating the platform where jobs can grow. I think there will be differences of opinion about what's the right role of state government. But I think what's on people's minds, what I hear on people's minds is we're worried about our jobs continuing. We're worried about growing jobs for our young people and people entering the labor force. So that's I think the key.
And that's why in the first segment you were supporting a bigger
jobs bond as just one tool. But there are a lot of other tools that state government has that we need to see how they're going to be used.
Okay. Others, yeah.
Well, at Maine Company, when we try to fulfill our mission of helping the state create jobs, we have this idea that jobs are created in three separate segments, if you will. You can attract new businesses to the state of Maine, you can help your existing businesses with their retention and expansion needs, and you can help incubate new businesses. So by focusing on those three areas, you have to develop a strategy in all three of those areas, and then you have to develop a way to implement that strategy so that you can understand that the needs of businesses in all three segments are different.
All right, but let's say you're running for governor. You know anybody running for governor?
I don't know why they want the job.
But yeah, how would you explain that to a voter, though? What you just said. I mean, that's my question: is how does a governor deal with that? How do they really deal with it?
I think you're right on it. That they need to have a strategy. They need to somehow show people that it's not just going to be disjointed and haphazard, which is what we've seen in the past. There needs to be an actual strategy that shows that they've thought of all of the different components that need to come together and how they fit together for the long term, not for 2 years or 4 years or 8 years. It needs to be a real strategy that the state has not seen in the past.
That's the question. What was it, 3 weeks ago we did the Measures of Growth program. We had the folks on. And Lori LaChance was great, and that was the issue we said. No, we can't be focusing on the immediate term. We got to look at the longer term. We got to look at the fundamentals.
You have to look at short and long term.
And that was my point, is though, but elections are short term.
Yeah, but the reality is that what's on voters' minds is absolutely true. It's jobs, jobs, jobs. It's not only about how you're going to create new jobs, but for the person that's sitting at home who hasn't worked in 8 or 12 months, is how are you going to put me back to work? That's what's on voters' minds, but you have to juxtapose that of the sort of the programmatic and the fiscal realities of what the next administration is going to encounter. And that is some very real things that are going to be taking away the ability of the administration to focus on creating new jobs. Budget is going to be a big issue.
What's going to be the deficit?
It depends on who you talk to, but there's going to be a deficit because we're not going to get the same amount of stimulus monies that have been used to patch up the budget in this last cycle.
Is it going to hit $1 billion?
Yeah,
that's what people say.
Likely.
Could be over $1 billion.
Over the 2-year period.
It's going to be issues like implementation of health care reform. That's going to come home in this next governor's cycle.
Because that eventually gets down to a state level.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Big important decisions for the state to make. The rejectionist approach, we don't want it, is maybe not the best strategy. Maine's actually positioned to take advantage of some of the new things in the federal thing, and it depends on the governor how much we're going to move forward or try to move backward.
I mean, there are a number of major issues that the next administration is going to have to confront, the next administration and the next legislature.
But will they be able to do that
Yeah.
with that looming debt, with those other big issues?
I think they're going to have to.
And there are some non-fiscal things, and D'arcy mentioned an important one. Just look at the permitting process.
Okay.
Look at the impact that
Oh,
the
yeah.
permitting process has
Yep.
on businesses looking to expand in the state. If you can streamline that and not have it subject to the whims of wherever you live in the state or by, you know, a rogue planning board member in some community, you have to figure out a way to streamline that. When companies call us, when companies call Maine & Company looking to build or expand or something, it's always one of the first things on the table. Now, D'arcy works in Brewer. They are a fabulous community when you're looking to expand, largely because of the work that D'arcy's doing there. We've worked on a project together, and she knows her planning board members, council members, knows what it takes to get it through the process. We need that type of consistency in every community in the state.
And even more so, we need it at the state level, because it doesn't exist at the state level right now. If you go to DEP, there are a lot of times where they can't tell you any deadline of when you might get your permit. It's open-ended, and that's not okay.
And that bring it back to the gubernatorial idea.
Yeah.
It comes down to leadership.
Right.
You have to have someone that can get the state's house in order, that can lead by example, so that the communities will want to be on board
And
with it.
I want to ask you a question about healthcare reform, because we brushed on that lightly. What is going to be the impact on businesses, small businesses in particular in Maine? How's that going to play out? What do you think?
Well, in the near term, small businesses under 50 employees will be eligible for some tax credits, up to 35% of the cost of premiums. I think the small businesses that I hear from are mostly saying, well, I'm not sure even a credit is going to advantage me because paying any premium is increasingly difficult. But I think the choice is not whether health reform is going to make everything suddenly easy, but whether it's going to be any better, not than it is right now, but what it would have been. Because the trend that we're on in premium increases is so steep that we're all aware we simply won't be able to continue to afford health insurance at all.
Well, I think that there are some very difficult choices that employers are going to have to make, as you know, small and large employers in the next few months, as they begin to parse through, you know, this massive piece of reform legislation. You know, there are credits available, but those credits go away in 5 years. You know, how good is that going to be, and how is that going to help people after that time?
Well, I think it's interesting. This brings us back to the topic we talked about earlier about value-added tax,
Yeah.
because it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that they're talking about value-added tax now that we have a national health care program, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to afford, I think, what they're trying to do.
That looming deficit is out there anyhow.
Right.
It's
It
going
is,
to be taken care of at
it's
some
going to get
point.
an awful lot larger.
Well, that's debatable too, but you're right, it depends.
CBO says not.
Well, once again, but they scored what was in front of
For what
them.
it's
You know
worth.
how
Yeah,
that
that's
works.
right, yeah.
Okay.
It's an interesting question, one that
Well, I want to ask you, do you believe in the CEO report?
Congressional Budget Office is what we've got to make predictions.
I know, but
Just
I mean, I know,
like
but
here
what
in
they-
the state, we use the Consensus Economic Forecasting Commission and the Revenue Forecasting Commission. We have to rely on those estimates. That's what
but the
CBO is
logic
for.
of
It's
looking at all those
nonpartisan.
government programs
But
over
it-
time,
they-
have any of them really met that? Do you really believe that this would save whatever it is,
Well, the commission-
trillion dollars
Actually,
over 20 years?
Come on now. In Maine, revenue forecasting has not been perfect, but has been pretty good, right?
Right.
Not perfect,
No, I get
but
that.
pretty good. I think
They missed that
CBO,
recession,
in
though.
general, would give some confidence to their predictions within 2 years. Any forecaster, you ask them, how's my 10-year forecast? Their answer is going to be, actually, 2-3 years out, it gets much harder to forecast. It is their best guess. That's what it is, but I don't think it's not done with malice aforethought.
And no one
They just
suggested
make
that.
it-
But
I
it's
don't think
also-
that either.
But it's also their best guess based on a set of assumptions that were provided to them that they can't change. So there are things that within the Congressional Budget Office they may not agree with for the assumptions. For example, that we're not going to raid Social Security or something else, and yet history has proven that we will every chance we get.
And
We're
that the
not.
doc fix would actually be done this time.
But for the assumptions they have is, well, we won't do that in the future.
right.
So
It's
it's a little
fairly-
tough to take
Okay,
that.
last word, go.
I think it's fairly ludicrous to assume that this health care bill is going to control costs.
Honor you are, geez.
Sorry.
Okay, we're going to wrap it there. Thanks a lot. I appreciate this. This is exactly what we wanted.